right. Well, why don't we get started? Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're thrilled to have as our speaker tonight Alexandra Kirtley, who is the Montgomery Garvin Curator of American Decorative Arts at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Alexandra is a native of Baltimore and a graduate of Hamilton College. She also received her master's degree from the University of Delaware's Winterthur program in early American culture. Alexandra joined the American Art Department at the Philadelphia Museum of Art as a curator in 2001, and she oversees the museum's world-renowned collection of early American furniture and decorative arts and has orchestrated substantial acquisitions to the PMA's collection over the years. She's also frequently speaker at conferences and symposia and has published research in scholarly journals, as well as completed 5 standalone books. Most recently, she wrote the first ever catalog of the Philadelphia Museum of Art's outstanding collection of American furniture. And this 336-page book has been sold out and is now in its 2nd printing. In addition to her work at the museum, Alexandra is an appointee of the United States Commission on Art. She's a member of the Board of Governors of the Decorative Arts Trust and a trustee of the Delaware Historical Society, and most importantly, a trustee of the Andalusia Foundation and chair of our Collections Committee. Alexandra lives in Wilmington with her husband and her 2 terrific kids, Caroline and Henry. Welcome, Alexandra. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and I pass it off to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen and my PowerPoint. So I come to you tonight to speak about the new American art galleries at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, entitled Presenting It Anew, because it's art, it's mostly art that everybody has seen, but we're presenting it anew in new galleries with new sort of adjacencies, new interpretation. And this is the first time that we have reinstalled the American Art Collection since 1976. Just to make most people aware of where we are, but just to make the point clear, this has been a long a project that has been long in its planning. And actually, when I was hired in 2001, I was hired with the goal of reinstalling the American art galleries. So there's like island time. In my house, there's barn time, but there's also museum time. So here we are 20 years later, and the American art galleries have been installed. But in order to do that, the museum had to clear out a lot of spaces. We built parking lot into the one hill here to the west of the museum. We moved our loading dock from the north side around to the south side. And before we even did that, we had to move our storage to an off-site location. So it's been a long time in coming, and the museum building is, of course, a centerpiece of the Philadelphia architectural landscape. And I like to tell people that it is also the backdrop for events that are both sacred and profane. So the architect who was chosen to oversee this reorganization of spaces inside the building was Frank Gehry. And many people know him for his incredible use of materials, and how he has made those materials into shapes that many would think were sort of not able to be done or able to be used in a building. And so for him to be chosen to work on this most classical design, a building with this most classical design, many people were a little shell-shocked about it. This is one of the models. This is a fairly large model. If I were standing next to it, my head would be about right here. So it's a fairly large model of how he had chosen to reorganize the space. And the woman who chose him, of course, was Darnencourt. And Anne looked to his work at the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, California, and what he had done there very early in his career. Again, taking interior spaces, reorganizing them to use the building better, and to have it fulfill its function of displaying art in a better way. Many of you knew Anne Darnencourt, and her, of course, very sudden passing at a young age in 2008 was a shock to everybody, especially the museum family, and everybody in the art world and anyone who had ever known her. So Timothy Rubb, who is seen on the right here, was her successor. Timothy has just recently announced his retirement, which is something that had been somewhat thought of by many, because he had always said that once he finished with the first phase of the facilities master plan, that was on his mind, and he will be 70 in March. And so he's done a lot of work at the museum in his 12 years there, and I hope that we all remember it well. Timothy, one of his expertise is actually architecture. And so he inherited the appointment of Frank Gehry, and he worked really, really closely with Frank Gehry, I think, to really sharpen the pencil on Gehry's design. I'll show you a couple parts of that. The chair of my department is Kathleen Foster, who is seen here on the left. She's widely known as an Aiken scholar, but to be sure, her expertise is broad and far-reaching. And the Department of American Art is painting, sculpture, and decorative arts. And Kathy's knowledge and appreciation for what we refer to as flat art and three-dimensional art knows no bounds. So we're thrilled and honored to have her still as our chair. And of course, none of this goes forward without the generosity of many people. And the largest of them is Robert L. McNeil. And the galleries, the whole wing is named for Bob McNeil, his many gifts to the museum, including his collection, as well as the endowment of all 6 curatorial positions in American art. We have other friends from around the country, including Linda Kaufman from Norfolk, Virginia. And of course, Joan and Victor Johnson, the late Victor Johnson. Joan is a fixture in the art world in Philadelphia. And she has been a trustee for many, many years. And of course, Jerry Lenfest. What arts organization in Philadelphia does anything without having had the support of Jerry and Marguerite? And currently, our greatest supporters today are Richard Worley and his wife, Leslie Miller. Leslie is the chair of the museum's board, and I have to say, it's an extraordinary thing to be reinstalling the American art galleries when the chair of your board is an American art collector. It's a great thing. And Leslie and Richard have promised some extraordinary pieces from their collection to the PMA, and we are grateful to them for their ongoing generosity and, of course, Leslie's leadership. So the project was divided, the facilities master plan was divided into bits and pieces. And the first bit was called by Timothy and Gail Harity, who was our former president and chief operating officer. They called it the core project. And it really referenced this area at the center of the museum, which is now called the Williams Forum. And formerly in that place had been the Pelt Auditorium, which was added to the building in 1959. So the building was completed and opened in 1928. And the auditorium, which was a lovely, congenial auditorium, but it had sort of plugged up the relationship between the 2 wings of the museum here. So I've been in the museum 20 years, and countless times you walk in the hallway and you see people sort of looking like this, and they're looking at a map, having no idea where they are. And one of the reasons for that was that they had little orientation to the outside spaces. So part of what was done was to empty out this area here and build the Williams Forum. Lenfest Hall, which was named in honor of Jerry and Marguerite Lenfest many years ago, was actually reworked, and a new entryway was put there to kind of make it a little more open when one entered into the building. So subtle changes. And I think that that's actually something that people have been surprised about. So the American art galleries are here in blue. They're marked off in blue here. So you walk in through Lenfest Hall, come around and up here into the American art galleries. It says 10,000 square feet. To be honest, it's about 9,000 square feet because you have a lot of interstitial space there. So larger than we had before, but you'll notice how different it looks. So this is Lenfest Hall. When you enter, a much more open feel, and you're looking down into the Williams Forum beyond the stairs there. And of course, we do own the painting Nude Descending the Staircase, and that always sort of reminds me of this with the stairs, Frank Gehry's wonderful stairs coming down into the Williams Forum, which will be used for many things, including the presentation of art. So the Robert L. McNeill Jr. Galleries begin here. And when we were handed over those spaces, so Timothy had sort of worked out those spaces for us. Let me go back real quick. One of the aspects of them is that you have the corridor would be here, windows looking down eastward into the city here. And there were 4 entry points into the galleries, these red spots into the galleries. So that one could enter in at 4 points, which was a challenge, but it also allowed us to think about engaging visitors into the galleries who may not have liked door 1, but they might have seen something through door 2 that they liked. So we'll be thinking about that. We worked for hundreds and hundreds of hours over top of a model that had furniture and paintings and smalls, everything worked into these little model pieces. And it was a little bit like a dollhouse. The curatorial team, I'll name here. This is Kathy Foster. This is Alexandra Kirtley, Carol Soltis, Peel Paintings, Sully Miniatures, Rosalie Hooper, who is our curatorial assistant, David Barquist, Silver, Metals, and Presidential China, and John Vick, who is the project manager. So I shouldn't say this is the main curatorial team. We, of course, also had a host of advisors at different levels and on different expertises whose expertise we sought and ideas we sought and commentary and critique of what we were doing. One of the new aspects of this that is one of the happiest things for me are the platforms. And I know that sounds silly, but the platforms really are a pedestal for the furniture. And I, of course, have my main charge is to put the furniture on full display. And furniture really is sculpture. It really is sculpture. It's a 3-dimensional, useful piece of sculpture, and it was designed and made with that in mind. And typically the museum presents furniture on painted platforms. And furniture, the floors in historic houses, and when the furniture was made and designed, was intended to have this lightness to it, this light color. It was typically yellow pine flooring here in colonial Philadelphia. And they would have actually had them planed. People would have been hired to actually plane the floors every now and again to make them lighter and brighter. And of course, at a moment when lighting was at a premium, the light floors helped to increase and broaden that space. So it was a really happy day for me when our exhibition designer said to me, Alexandra, you keep talking about these wooden floors. I have actually priced out and figured out that we can have the platforms in yellow pine. So I want you to take note as we walk through the galleries of the yellow pine floors. The corridor here that you see, this is how it appears now. Fear not. COVID clearly affected us. This has affected everybody. This corridor will be painted. It will not always be a stark white. It will be painted, and we will have art displayed in cases along the piers in between the windows. So maybe when you come and visit in a couple months, you will be able to see that. We start, of course, with the land acknowledgement, and acknowledging that the land that we are on is the home of the Lenape people with whom William Penn, when he arrived in 1681, made several treaties and hoping to have a peaceful coexistence. But as we all know, that did not happen. And so our first gallery is entitled American Encounters. And it really is about how by trade, by colonization, by force, many cultures came to the land between the Delaware and the Schuylkill River, Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and created a new culture. And we seek to recognize all of those cultures as we look at them. Oops. I want to just call your attention to, we'll talk about the 2 paintings by Gustavus Hesilius, the Swedish painter, but below that is also on loan from the city of Philadelphia, is a wampum belt. Wampum is they're small cylindrical beads, usually made out of shells, and they're woven into decoration, these sort of belt-like looking decoration that was also used as currency. And this is one that was has a history of ownership by William Penn himself, and it represents his treaty with the Lenape people. For many years, of course, the larger man there had been interpreted as William Penn and the smaller man as the Lenape chief Tamanin, but we know, of course, that the Lenape chief was the larger man and William Penn would have been depicted as a smaller man. So coming out of the Atwater Kent Museum, owned by the city of Philadelphia and the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, are Hesilius's 1735 paintings of La Poensa and Tishkawan. You see La Poensa, the Indian chief, has these wonderful markings, tattoos on his forehead. Tishkawan does not. The name Tishkawan actually means man without black marks, man without tattoos. So we recognize them. They are here, the men who had made a treaty with William Penn's grandchildren, known as the Walking Treaty, and they had been cheated out of a lot of land. Here they are shown as regal and a little sad, defeated, having been deceived in the Walking Treaty. So we start off our gallery and recognizing the use of and the importation of enslaved Africans and their significance in Philadelphia, in early Philadelphia. Building roads. They were also on a lot of Caribbean plantations owned by the Quakers who were settling mainly in Philadelphia, and who may not have had too many enslaved people here in Philadelphia, but they had plantations in the Caribbean where they were felling mahogany and sugarcane, distilling rum, and generating tremendous wealth and mercantile activity. So there was plenty of enslaved opportunity for us to talk about the contributions of enslaved people. And one of those ways is through the iron forges. So the enslaved Africans brought with them knowledge and intellect about how to produce the iron that comes out of these forges. And we recognize that here. They're also working alongside artisans, white artisans in the urban areas, and that's represented by a bowl there. Penn, if nothing else, was a great marketer, right? So Penn's Woods, he names his settlement Penn's Woods. And of course, he is exporting wood. So mahogany that you see in the desk in the corner there is coming into the port of Philadelphia, as well as wood like walnut, maple, and other light woods that are being felled and exported out of Philadelphia and being used as cabinet woods here in Philadelphia. And here's a dressing table probably made by James Bartram, the younger brother of John Bartram. And you see the back of it has also been shaped, so it may have been not necessarily plumb against the wall there. The top of it is inlaid with these wonderful designs in various light woods that were naturally occurring, of course, in Philadelphia. This was made in 1724 for a woman named Elizabeth Maris. And actually Bartram ended up marrying her in 1726. On the other side of the gallery, we show further works of art that were owned by the Quakers in Philadelphia. And we use this as a sort of jumping off point to contrast Quaker Philadelphia with the sort of Catholic grandeur of Mexico and the Spanish settlements in and around the Caribbean. And so here we have Costa paintings. We have King Philip, I think, from Spain. And I just want to also contrast, make that contrast, right? So here we have what the Spanish colonials are doing and living with, and how they are have their works of art in colonial Mexico, compared with what's going on in Philadelphia. So Quaker Philadelphia and the Catholic grandeur of New Spain. And here we have St. Michael the Archangel, as well as the Our Lady of Potosi. The next gallery, which is right through here, is about the global economy. And this really came about from something that has always driven me crazy when people say, oh, the new global economy. And you think, no, the global economy is not a new thing. So this fabulous oversized map by Henry Popple on the wall to show the different settlements in the different colors represent the different settlements of Europeans in the Northern Hemisphere here. And the works of art also show not only Philadelphia's connectivity to the rest of the world, but also those of the British colonies throughout North America. So this chair, you see it here on the left. This is a spread from the furniture catalog. And here on the left, you see the chair so-called naked, without its upholstery. And the beauty of this early Boston easy chair, this is made in Boston about 1710, 1715. One of the beauties of this survival, it's one of 12, is that it had not been reupholstered that often and left us a lot of evidence for the reupholstery. So I worked many years, yes, years, on what the upholstery would possibly look like, and studying the physical evidence on the frame to come up with what you see here, the completed reupholstered chair. So there are three different sizes of trim or braid, as it was called, on this. And then the brass nails were used not only to secure the trim to the chair, but also to add added decoration and added sort of bling, if you will, to the chair. Now, fear not, we cut off the shanks of those brass nails and we just glue them onto the wool damask. This crimson and gold is a combination that was known to have been popular in the early 18th century in both Philadelphia and Boston, where this was made. Notice the chair leans back a lot. That's called a layback. It made it quite tippy. We have not ever sat in this chair, obviously, but the donors, the Vogels who gave it to us have. It's a very narrow chair and very sort of tippy. The base is maple. It's turned maple that was painted to mimic mahogany. Here's the top of it, where we've sewn some braid to make it look like what's called a false cresting. The high chest in this gallery that had been for many years thought to have been made in Philadelphia. And in fact, research discovered that it was made in Charleston. So basically it's signed JOS period Claypool, and then 1743 underneath. And it was believed to either been made by Joseph Claypool or his son, Josiah Claypool. And Joseph Claypool was believed to have died in 1743, but my research actually turned up that he died in 1741. He's buried at Christ Church downtown in Philadelphia in 1741. His estate was not probated until 1743, but he was dead in 1741. So it has to be his son, Josiah Claypool. Well, Josiah Claypool, I found, was actually excommunicated, sort of exiled from the city of Philadelphia in 1739 for stealing silver from the silversmith Nathaniel Richardson. So he went down to Charleston, South Carolina, and lived there until he died in 1757. So this high chest is Josiah Claypool, 1743, which makes it Charleston, South Carolina, and the earliest piece of signed and documented Southern furniture. This was a beautiful thing for me because I've always been looking to increase our collection of Southern furniture. And I did so by an enormous exponent by just simply researching what had been somewhat of an enigma of a piece. The other side of this gallery, we talk about mahogany, walnut. We also talk about ceramics and the sort of pursuit for porcelain, the desire to have porcelain. And for that, we can, the ability to do that, we can also thank Edwin Atlee Barber, who was an early director of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and then still actually considered one of the world's experts in ceramics. And he assembled for the Philadelphia Museum of Art what is widely acknowledged as the best, the sort of yardstick collection of American ceramics, including this very large jar with handles that was made by Damian Hernandez in Puebla, Mexico, in about 1630. So they were trading, the colonial Spanish were already trading directly with China across the Pacific. And we have Chinese export porcelain coming into colonial Mexico and actually up into even the Five Corners area of what is now the United States. That dates from the 16th and 17th centuries. So this was made there. It's made with a tin glazed ceramic that is meant to imitate porcelain. This mahogany spice chest, I always show it up on a pedestal so people don't think it's a high chest itself. And this is made of mahogany in Philadelphia. It's a very early demonstration of the use of mahogany. in cabinet making woods. Cabinet makers stocked mahogany in Philadelphia in the 1690s. That's very early, when one considers that the first evidence of mahogany in the port city of Newport, Rhode Island was 1734. So this is much earlier, almost 40 years earlier than that. The mahogany spice chests appear in inventories from 1681 throughout the 18th century. As part of my research for the furniture catalog, I actually read every probate inventory that was for Philadelphia from 1681 to 1800, so tens of thousands of them, hence my need for glasses now. And you'll see spice chests turning up all the time. They're always on top of tables, on top of chests, and they're meant to hold treasured, valuable things. You'll notice that this one has a lock on the cabinet door. That cabinet lifts up, but it has a lock on it. So it's where somebody would store their treasured things. The word spice, actually, if you study the etymology of it, the word spice actually means sort or kind. So a spice chest is just a chest to hold a variety of things. And here you see inside of it these wonderful arrangements of drawers. As we leave that gallery and turn down and see the enfilade here, we turn to our left and we have our wall of chairs. And this is talking about the use of a chair with and the growth of individualized seating in the 18th century. And it actually is sort of mimicking something that Charles Montgomery did at Yale University Art Gallery in the early 1970s. But it works really well, and we think it's sort of visually alluring too. So we start with a Philadelphia chair that has these wonderful anthropomorphic little boots on the feet. A walnut chair would have been not as common as the one below it, which is a rush-seated chair. One of the most ubiquitous forms of seating, made of maple. So the other chair is made of mahogany. This one's of maple. You can see the stripe on that vase-shaped splat there. And rush-seated chairs appear in the most modest inventories from the 18th century, as well as those that are the most elegant houses. So they're quite useful chairs. And this one is particularly notable because it has turned side stretchers. So I just recently bought this for the museum. Even though we had some in the collection, this is by far the best. And you're always looking to see how much ornamentation, how much decoration the chair maker can do and make of one sort of static form. Next chair comes from Bermuda. Bermuda is, of course, an early settlement, and right out there on the Atlantic, a stop along the way for many ships. And of course, Bermuda has its own hardwood known as Bermuda cedar. And these two chairs are made of Bermuda cedar. And they look like London chairs, representing their very close relationship with London. And they also look like Boston chairs, because Boston also has a similarly close relationship with London design. But what you see in some quirks in Bermuda furniture, notably these sort of teeth, these little saw teeth at the top of the vase here, on the inverted vase, I should say, right there, and then under here, you see those appear in Bermuda furniture, as well as these really interesting dovetails. It's such an interesting and really heterogeneous mix of people and influences in Bermuda furniture. It's one of my great loves, actually. This is one of my favorite acquisitions, and it, of course, involves our friend Richard Snowden, who's a fellow trustee and of the Andalusia Foundation. He's also a member of the Philadelphia Museum of Art's American Art Advisory Committee. And he and I saw this chair at Freeman's, and it was being offered for auction. And it had not made it into the catalog, which, if you're looking for a deal, is always a good thing. And so he and I had equally excited about seeing this there. And, oh, would you like this, Alexandra? Oh, I would love it. I would love it. I would love it. And so he was having a colleague of his do his bidding. And he said that it would be at a certain amount, and the chair went far above that. Well, the colleague had misunderstood him, and he ended up owning this. So he called me the next day and said, "Are you going to come down to Freeman's and pick up your chair?" And I said, "You didn't get it." He said, "Oh, yes, I did." So I was absolutely thrilled to have this. This is a what's known as a Butaka chair, or made in Campeche, Mexico. It is mahogany. It has its original leather upholstery. And the form of it is actually this amazing hybrid of seating from the Philippines. So on the west coast of Mexico, they're trading with China through the Philippines. There's an influence coming in to colonial Mexico from the Philippines. So it has an element of Philippine design. It also has an element of indigenous seating. So seating from the people who were living in Mexico when the Spanish arrived. And then it has a mixture of design influence from Italy, which came to Spain, which came to New Spain. So it's really this amazing hybrid. It has this sling-like quality. And of course, famously about 100 years, 70 years later, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington were all just passionate over this shape and the sort of sling-backness of it. So we are thrilled to have this one at the museum, the earliest example of the form, again, with its original leather upholstery and the brass nails. It has a history in the Meade family of Philadelphia, which makes it even more extraordinary for us. And of course, the carving on the shell here. These little capitals and the shape of, or the finials rather, and the shape of the crest rail come from the cathedral at Campeche, which shows one of the great relationships between architecture and furniture. Cabinet makers were also working in Philadelphia on the interiors of people's houses, working on the paneling of them. And of course, the carvers of Philadelphia, most of their work, about 80% of their work was carving the interiors, not necessarily furniture. We also have a chair from Portugal that we show. It has Brazil, which shows a great Portuguese influence from Portuguese Rococo design and style. Below that, the classic Philadelphia side chair of the mid 18th century. And this one is just one of my favorites. And that's one of the great fun things about being a curator, that sometimes you just get to put things out because they're your favorite. Oops. An armchair from the Powell family, Samuel Powell's parents, actually, not necessarily Samuel Powell himself, but one of these great armchairs of Philadelphia with a solid splat, round seat, and the arm holds there, the hand holds this great round feel on them. That is 3 pieces of wood. It's not 1 piece of wood, but the quintessential Philadelphia armchair of about 1750-55. And below that, a chair that entered the collection in 1929. But interestingly, when I came to the museum in 2001, I took it off view because something was just sort of, I don't know, it was just sort of not right about the chair. I felt like it needed to be reconsidered. And when I reconsidered it for the furniture catalog, I came up with the fact that it's not an easy chair. It had always been called an easy chair. It was likely made by Benjamin Randolph. It descended in his family, but it's not an easy chair. It's what's known as a bergère à oreille, or a French open armchair. And it's a French interpretation, a French take on an upholstered chair with wings, with ears or wings to enclose somebody. Would have been in a bedchamber. And the difference is that it has these wooden handholds and arm supports. I was able to find this portrait that's at the National Gallery in London, but it was painted by Henri-Pierre Donlue of the Baron de Bensenville in his salon. And you see him here sitting in a chair that's very similar to our chair. So this is how the chair appeared when I first arrived. It had this funny shape to the crest rail, and it had a very low back, and some of the carving was missing. And I worked for many years with numerous conservators. And finally, it was Beirut Salim Nejad who really worked out what was going on with the crest rail. And basically, as the upholsterers had nailed into the crest rail, it had worn away and somebody had shaped it like that. And we were able to figure out that the design, and this happens in furniture all the time, that often the design of the crest rail is mimicked on the design of the front rail. So these two are now copacetic, and it really makes it much more visually, the proportions really fall into place when you do that. Now you'll notice that it has this very, very puffy cushion on it. And that is in the French taste too. That's what the French did with their chairs. They have these huge, thick cushions. if one, no one would any longer, but if one in the 18th century had sat on that, the cushion would have actually poofed up and you can see the carving on the inside of the arms. Now, the blue that we have on the chair right now, this blue upholstery is a worsted wool damask in a pattern that's known as the Philadelphia Museum pattern. That's a whole other hour-long lecture on upholstery. But it's known as the Philadelphia Museum pattern based on some research that I did to come up with the design. And it has a blue trim, blue tape on it. This is actually an indigo blue. In the colonial revival period that came about in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, white women didn't like blue on upholstery on chairs like this because it reflected poorly on their skin. So they didn't do them in blue. Well, in my inventory research found that, of course, blue is an extremely common color. Blue, red, yellow, green, but blue is extremely common. And what I wanted to do was show an indigo blue. Indigo is a dye stuff. It's grown and it's used as a dye to dye wool, silk, cotton, and linen, anything. It's a dye. And the technology for indigo, for growing indigo, cultivating it and using it as a dye stuff was brought to the southern United States, was brought to the southern colonial North America by enslaved Africans. So it is a contribution that enslaved Africans made to the history of art and upholstery and furniture in colonial North America. So I wanted to actually find somebody who was using indigo to dye. And Beth Paolini, who's one of who's our upholsterer, our seamstress at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, she was able to locate someone in Northwest Pennsylvania who grows indigo and uses it as a dye. And so what you see here is indigo dye. This, when somebody says something is indigo colored, this is exactly what it is. We're very pleased with this, how it turned out. Our next sort of little note is about carving. And so of course, carving is the topic that is much discussed. I will tell you that in my inventory research, I came up with many more names of carvers than those that are bandied about in the marketplace nowadays. So I am extremely conservative in assigning the name of carver to something. This high chest was made by David Kinsey and Samuel Appleton. They're joiners. They signed this high chest, and you can see here the shells on it. So we have a shell here, here, and here. And what I wanted to do research on why the shell, why are these shells all over furniture like this? And what I determined was that this is actually the anatomy of a scallop shell. And I have a scallop shell here in my library. I'll show you. So this is actually from the banks of the James River. This is the shell that's on the bottom drawer. So if this is a scallop, it's a bivalve, right? So this is the open area here on the bottom drawer. Now, when this was alive, it had membrane growing out of it. And so if you were to Google a scallop shell, you would see that Google shows you that when they're alive, they have lots of membranes coming out of the shells. And those here are the membranes right here. But the part of the shell that's sort of the penultimate part, the part that we eat, the roe, is known as the corolla. And this is the corolla. So what I believe is that this high chest and a lot of other furniture, a lot of other interior architectural carving actually is the anatomy of a scallop shell. If you were to walk down the hall and you were to enter here, you would come upon John Singleton Copley's sole lone portrait of Philadelphia sitters, Thomas Mifflin and his wife, Sarah Morris Mifflin, who went to Boston to rabble-rouse the Bostonians and encourage them to join the patriot cause that was brewing in Philadelphia. And here you see this wonderful Quaker couple. She is in her wool with her diaphanous silk, and he is in his wool suit. She's wearing her Quaker cap. And that is typical Quaker. So they're not being ostentatious or showy. They have very fine materials, and they are but they're fine materials, but not flashy, I should say. And that's typical. Our next area, we look at porcelain here, and this Boston tea table, which had been owned by Peggy and Newbold Smith, and we purchased it at auction. It's our first actually Boston Massachusetts tea table to enter the collection. And after it came and I was able to do research on it, I was able to very strongly attribute it to a man named James Graham, who also made these chairs. I love this sort of abstracted feet. This is the knee, but this is the foot. It's like this abstracted hairy paw foot. I want to talk a little bit about porcelain. Porcelain gets its name, of course, from the Italian word for cowrie shell, which is porcellana, because shells have the same sort of texture as porcelain. There's a wonderful rib of kaolin that comes down the sort of Piedmont area, all the way from Pennsylvania, all the way down into South Carolina and Georgia. And the first porcelain in North America made by the colonial people was made in Georgia and Savannah. It's widely believed that the Native Americans were already, the indigenous people were already making porcelain, already firing porcelain using that white clay that was to be found. But at Cane Hoy, South Carolina, just about 9 miles northwest of Charleston, South Carolina, a Staffordshire potter named John Bartlam began making porcelain and including this tea bowl, which I found in England in 2012 just by chance and was able to acquire it for the museum. It's a very tiny little bowl. The decoration, the underglazed blue decoration was made using a transfer print. And here we see what we call sort of punting on the Wando River in South Carolina here. And on the bottom of it, that's my hand holding it, so it's very tiny. But at the bottom of it has this wonderful evidence of the way he potted, which you can see that has this sort of pyramid in the bottom, and actually is just part of the potting process. But something notable about the way John Bartlam made this. Again, in Charleston, Cane Hoy, northwest of Charleston, 1765 to 70. After Bartlam's porcelain failed, George Anthony Morris and Gussie Bonin opened up a manufactory in Philadelphia. Following on the success of glass manufacturing in the Philadelphia area, they opened up the porcelain manufacturing using the white clay from the White Clay Creek in Newcastle County, Delaware. I'm actually sitting in Delaware, that's where I live. Newcastle County, of course, being part of Pennsylvania until 1776. But they use the clays from the White Clay Creek State Park here. This is a showing that the little pickle stands that I'll show you in a second are made from 72 different elements, 72 separately cast and molded elements, all make this tiny little pickle stand. And in 2008, I mounted an exhibition of the known work of Bonin and Morris's manufactory. And it was only 19 pieces. A month after the exhibition closed, I was called by a man who said, I think I have something you might want to see. I don't know. My mother said it was important. I'm not sure. And he sent this to me. And I think the screams could be heard for miles. So it took me 6 years to execute the gift. He did end up giving it outright to the museum. And here I am with it when it arrived. Very happy and relieved after 6 long years of negotiating. So our next little area, John and Elizabeth Cadwallader by Charles Wilson Peele with their daughter Anne seated on the table there. We sort of recreate that scene. And here is the painting in its original frame. The elements of it were cut off in 1909 because the frames were not in good condition. This painting and the 4 others that go with it, the sort of family group of the Cadwallader family, all the frames were reduced, all the little bits. The painting was called for exhibition, for loan to Korea and Australia. And I said, oh my gosh, we just cannot send it with that frame. We have to do something about it. So Timothy Rubb said, okay, Kirtley, if you want to do it, raise the money and you can do it, but it has to leave for Korea on time. Brett Headley, who's a conservator, he was at the museum. He's now in private practice and he does work for the Andalusia Foundation. He and I worked together to come up with the design, and Brett worked for 4 months every day, all through Hurricane Sandy. He was the only person at the building, I think. And he worked to carve in white pine a reproduction of what the design of the frame. And here it is. So that's sort of before and after. And this is all to underscore the point that Charles Willson Peale made when he said that a mediocre painting will survive if it has a good frame. So he obviously understood the significance of having a good frame. And we think that with the frame, John and Elizabeth Cadwallader and their daughter Anne have never looked better. And you see it again. The chair that she is in which she is sitting, you see right there. And we purchased this in 2003. I was actually pregnant with my daughter when I bought it at auction. The auctioneer said to me, "Sold to the lady and her baby seated on the aisle," because I was absolutely enormous. And so that was an exciting acquisition for me. And then to discover that hidden in the painting right under his arm was actually the evidence that Mrs. Cadwallader was sitting in this when she had it painted. Across from that, we have along that main wall there, we have a wall that sort of was given to us, one could say, by Ben Franklin, who wrote home to his wife that, quote, "Our geniuses all go to Europe. In England at present, the best history painter, West, the best portrait painter, Copley, and the best landscape painter, Taylor, at Bath are all Americans." So here we have Benjamin West's Agrippina, returning with the ashes of her husband Germanicus. An early Benjamin West of Thomas Mifflin before he left Pennsylvania and went to London. We have landscapes by the little-known John Taylor, also of Pennsylvania, who left and went to London and painted at Bath before he died very young. These are a recent gift of Leslie Miller and Richard Worley. And then we have two Copleys here. And so all three of these painters, American, working in London, and considered to be the best of their type in London at this time. Our next gallery contrasts Philadelphia with sort of the lands west of Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania Germans. We have British style you see here. We contrast that with the style of the Pennsylvania Germans. We start with two stools, a promise gift to us of Leslie Miller and Richard Worley. Stools were unusual in the 18th century, but they're more unusual as survivals. They allow the sitter to be sort of seen in the round. A round tea table. This is Philadelphia's preference, not the squared tea table that we found in Boston, but the round table. This one has its edges carved with these fabulous rosettes. And we have above it a salver. This salver, of course, would have been placed on the table when the top was up and in use. The top was down and in use. And this derives really from an installation design from 2013 that I did. And I brought my daughter to see this little installation that I had done. And I had salvers above the tea table top. And my daughter said, "Oh, I get it." In other words, she understood the relationship between the shape of the tea table top and the shape of the salver. And it's those sort of connections that we're trying to make, those visual connections that we're trying to make that people can see without reading the label. The children of Ruth and Matthew McConnell on loan and a promised gift to us of Leslie Miller and Richard Worley again. Wonderful paintings by a fairly little known man named Jeremiah Clark, Philadelphia 1790. And we like to show furniture in sets because that's how it was made. And so below that are the Deschler furniture. The high chest and dressing table and Kleiderschrank, sort of the penultimate case furniture made in Philadelphia, contrasted with the Kleiderschrank made for George Huber in 1779. So these were only made about 10 years apart. And they represent sort of the not only the best cabinet making skills, but the height of taste in downtown Philadelphia and in Lancaster in the German taste. So the high chest and dressing table with Aesop's fables of the fox and grapes applied carved to the drawer in the front. Aesop being one of the only fiction that Quakers were encouraged to read because the fables had morals like the Bible themselves. They were parables. You see that close detail. And of course, the Kleiderschrank with sulfur inlay, decoration, really connecting George Huber to his family's roots in Germany. So this is looking at the sort of Pennsylvania German side of that gallery with our incredibly strong collection of Pennsylvania German ceramics and fraktur, all of them also preserving the German language for those Pennsylvania Germans whose agricultural products fueled the wealth of the port of Philadelphia. To the side of it, we have, of course, dower chests. So like the Kleiderschrank, chests like this were made and given to to young people when they were coming of age. So this was given to Maria Coutts in 1783 when she was 21 by her parents, and they were used to store textiles, which were of course extremely valuable. The painted chest you see here, one of the drawers has this fabulous incised decoration of the painted decoration. So it's almost as if the painter had laid it out. And of course, they're very similar to the Fraktur designs and iconography, as well as that on the redware. And here it is open, you see, with that decorative. The Pennsylvania Germans decorated everything. Even their hinges were decorative. So, and you can get this close to it in the gallery, a wonderful thing. So now we're going to move in here and look at what the entrance that you see there, which is of course our fabulously newly conserved staircase group of Raphael and Titian Ramsey Peale. And the Peale Gallery, one of Bob McNeil's great collections that he donated to the museum, is of the Peales. This is the family of William Goldsborough above a Baltimore sideboard, which came to the museum somewhat recently and has this wonderful anthropomorphic design to the inlay. And more of the Peales, McCains. And then on axis there, you saw it earlier, is a newly redone installation that is sort of an encore of what I did in 2016. My colleague Peggy Ali and I did in 2016 for the wall and furniture, providing the all important context for the art. And so I'm just going to play this. So that was the result of a lot of research and 6 years of Peggy Ollie's transformative work conserving the painted surfaces of the furniture. As well, she and I worked with Beth Paolini to redo the upholstery. And when we did this exhibition in 2016, it was so popular that we decided to reprise the sort of installation of it in its original context. And of course, when you know that much about the original context, it would really be criminal to ignore it and not honor it in that way. We come to this area of Philadelphia, this Republican court moment of Philadelphia, and that really hinges on this quote, one of my favorite quotes from the architect Benjamin Henry Latrobe. And Henry Latrobe said in 1809 that Americans are jammed between their Republican principles and their aristocratic wishes. So there's always this push and pull, this tension between democratic Republican principles and aristocratic wishes. So we wanted to live beautifully, but we wanted to do it in our own Republican democratic way. So you see that in the art of that period, whether it's the silver, whether it's the porcelain, whether it's the paintings of General Williams by Thomas Sully, or the Gilbert Stuart of Anne Bingham, and certainly in the furniture, which I show you closer here. And I'm just going to zero in on this painted chair. This is one of the ways I was able to know Jimmy Biddle, Mr. Biddle, Jamie's father, who had saved these chairs when they were sold from a house in Bristol, Pennsylvania. And then he donated them one to the Met, one to the PMA, one to San Francisco, one to Chicago, one to Winterthur. And then he kept some for Andalusia as well. And I came upon this chair and started doing research on it. And the one that we had been given actually had the name of the painter on it. You see here, J.P. Fonday. This is extremely enlarged. John Philip Fonday. And I was able to do an enormous research project on that. And in doing that, get to know Mr. Biddle extremely well for the last years of his life. So great honor and privilege for me to have done that. And this chair has sort of risen to the top of every collection based on that research and discovery that was done at that time. And here's so we turn now, we have presidential china, as well as the Turbidays. These are paintings of the first emperor and empress of Mexico. He was killed and she left Mexico and came to Philadelphia. That happens a lot. Right, so we have like Madame Moreau, who's exiled by Napoleon, General Madame Moreau. They come to Philadelphia when they're exiled from France. The Turbidays come to Philadelphia when they're exiled from Mexico. And when Napoleon loses at Waterloo, his older brother, Joseph Bonaparte, a good friend of Nicholas Biddle's, comes to Philadelphia. And here we have his French bedstead installed now at the museum with in front of some wonderful wallpaper. On the right-hand side, you see the Thomas Birch given to us by Bob McNeil, showing the view from Point Breeze, which is just across the Delaware River from Andalusia. And of course, there's such a great story between Bonaparte and Nicholas Biddle, Joseph Bonaparte. We do not know whether this bed had its own canopy. He owned 2 French bedsteads when he died. So we came up with this upholstery as something that is very possible, could have been for this French bedstead. French bedsteads were not used for every night sleeping. They were used simply for sort of day lounging. The 2 that he owned had blue wool upholstery and white cotton, and I chose to do it in a white cotton. There are many hands when it comes to putting these sort of things together. I have this little stop action video for you. So that was us installing that in February. I think February, maybe April. Oh, well, sometime this past winter. So now I'm going to leave this space and come to our final spaces that show art and ambition. So this is art made much more accessible to many more people beginning in sort of 1810s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. We have a lot more people own silver. A lot more people have their portraits painted. Like you see here, the Montiers, a free Black couple in Philadelphia, have their portraits painted. It's not just Mr. and Mrs. Mifflin any longer. In this corner here, we have a wonderful display of free Black artisans working. So this is Thomas Gross, a cabinet maker, Joshua Johnson, a painter out of Baltimore, a free Black man, and then our Episcopal Bishop's chair, where the cabinet maker actually employed a free Black woman in his shop. This, again, the double chest, signed by Thomas Gross, maker. I love that about him, how he says Thomas Gross, maker. There's no misunderstanding about his role in this. And we have, this is a photo reproduction actually of the drawer, so we don't have to have the drawer out and have the stability of that signature threatened. And the bishop's chair, the Episcopal bishop's chair made for St. James Church, which is one of 3 cathedrals in Philadelphia, built in 1809, torn down in 1870. I was able to actually find the label for it and reassociate it with the chair for Richard Alexander. And here you see a picture of Richard Alexander. You can never, you always have an opportunity to talk about wine when I'm speaking with Andalusia, and this is of course a wine case. We have the grapes carved on here, made for the Gratz family of Philadelphia. This is on wheels, but have been moved around the dining room. The back of it, wonderful carving. And of course we have this bulwark brass inlay, and our final space, second to last space here. A reed organ made in Philadelphia in 1834 that has in the top a dressing box and writing table. Secretary bookcase made by Isaac Jones for the Van Sickles, who were wine merchants in Philadelphia. A detail of that. And of course, painting, landscape painting, the birth of landscape painting by Thomas Doughty, flanking the Thomas Cole here. And the waterworks, also by Doughty. Tucker porcelain in Philadelphia, 1826 to 1838. The Philadelphia Museum of Art owns the mother lode of this. We have 560 some pieces, many of them signed. And now our final gallery is Traditions on the Move. So this is Pennsylvania Germans as they sort of move around and populate more of Pennsylvania, but also as they begin to assimilate more. And you start seeing more things that are in English in this period. This gallery. As I said, mentioned the wonderful ironwork that comes out of the German communities, those fabulous designs. This is on a wonderful sight line down the hallway. Our wall of plates returns. The bird tree, these sort of ornamental mantle pieces that were placed on mantles, just decorative trees. These are birds in all different seasons of plumage. So obviously a confection. And then we end with our eagles, a Fraktur, from Joan and Victor Johnson's collection, and from Leslie Miller's outstanding collection of samplers, Pennsylvania samplers. I end here just to let people know that the second floor galleries, which will deal with art, American art 1850 nearly to the present, we are already in process planning for the redo of those galleries, and that they will probably start with this sofa, this Gothic sofa made for a family who are actually marble merchants. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions that people may have.
Feel free to put your questions into the chat function, and then Alexandra can see them.
Should I stop sharing? Yes. Okay. No questions? Or some, oh yes. So we've been asked, how do you keep the beautiful furniture clean? Well, there are 2 things that we do, and I shouldn't, that would be the royal we, because I have colleagues who really specialize in this. And we have gallery technicians who are responsible for doing the cleaning, and they work in consultation with conservation. We are very careful about what kind of brushes we use. Usually it's like a rabbit hair brush. I think I have one here that we use that doesn't scratch the surfaces. With having had so much construction in the building, we had to be extremely careful because sometimes dust that may get on, may seep through little interstices. Sometimes plaster dust can have some abrasive materials in them. So they had to be extremely careful doing that. So sometimes they would actually vacuum them. But the mitigation is keeping them covered in plastic, keeping filters clean, and that sort of thing. But the dusting is done by specialized technicians who work in concert with conservation to make sure that the surfaces are not scratched. Most of the surfaces that you see in the furniture have been refinished, right? These finishes are organic, they degrade, and every 15 to 20 years, people would have their furniture refinished. So very few pieces have their original finish on them. And oftentimes when they do, it's not very pretty because they start separating from the wood and you get refraction. It's quite complicated. So we do it very carefully. And of course, the brass hardware or whatever type of hardware there may be, that's treated differently. As far as the painted surfaces go, those, when they have varnish on top of them, they will sometimes remove, as Peggy did with the wall and furniture. She removes the layers of varnish, but you leave a certain amount of varnish on it because the painted layers are between layers of varnish. So you have like wood, paint, varnish, paint, varnish, paint. So if you go down too far, you can actually, all that gold painted decoration will like just evaporate. So it's what's called undercutting. And so you have to be extremely careful, extremely careful. As far as the amount of research that went into this, I mean, decades, I guess, if you took all of the minds that had gotten together. But for me personally, I started bearing down on it and thinking about it for my entire tenure at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but really bearing down on the research as part of my research for the furniture catalog, which I have right here. It was a great happenstance for the Philadelphia Museum of Art that the two were being done in tandem, that I had just come off the wall furniture project and that I was working on furniture catalog at the same time as the research for the galleries. It was a little more difficult for Alexandra Kirtley and family. I will admit that. It was a trying time the past 5 or 6 years because it was sort of 100% effort on both sides. Leslie Miller and Richard Worley provided the funding for the American Furniture Catalog. And in that was primarily the funding for the conservation work. And so the fact that I was able to hire conservators to be working on the furniture to prepare it for my research and the photography for the catalog, it doubled the fact that we needed them also to be conserved for the reinstallation. So we have much more furniture than is on display, as you may imagine. About every 6 months, we will be rotating selections of furniture through the galleries. So if you think of, one space in the gallery, in the new gallery, sort of behind it are like 5 or 6 lieutenants, right? So now because of the furniture catalog, all those lieutenants are ready to go. They're gallery ready. So conservation doesn't have. So Connie has asked, what was the most surprising information you learned? I think the most surprising information would be we all know that the colonial revival had a tremendous impact on how history was written and taught to us. I mean, even to me, when I was growing up in the 70s and what I learned. But I think that the strength of the colonial revival is even more significant than I thought. And I'll give you for example, there's sort of this, what you learn is that Japan furniture was, which is furniture that's painted in imitation of lacquer work, of Japan's lacquer work made in China. Japan furniture was only made in Boston. Well, I found out that's not true. When you go to the primary documents and you start reading the inventories, reading cabinet makers' advertisements really closely, reading what was going on, Japan work was made in Philadelphia. It just didn't survive. So what we have is sort of the colonial revival impacting what people in the late 19th and early 20th centuries decided to save to represent Philadelphia. So you have to always remember that, like, it's kind of survival of the fittest. And the people of the late 19th and early 20th centuries who made the decision whether to save something or not, they have sort of colored our idea of what we had. Another example would be slate top tables. Slate top tables, there's 6 of them known, and they're only made only in Boston. No, they were made in Philadelphia as well. They just don't survive. So the colors of the galleries. Oh, our friend Mary Graham asked about the colors of the galleries. So those, we had spoken about the vibrancy of the type of colors that we wanted. And color is something that is not, again, is an impact of the colonial revival, where you see paler colors. But when you look at, say, like a colored prints of the 18th century, when you look at recipes that were used for paint, when you look at descriptions of interiors, when you consider upholstery, we realize that the color of painted walls was much more vibrant. I often refer to this as like the Sistine Chapel. Remember how when you first saw images of the Sistine Chapel when you were young, it was a sfumato and it was like all darkened, and well, that was just the residue from the many candles that had been burning in the Sistine Chapel for centuries. And then when they conserved the ceiling, remember how garish those colors looked. And now we've all gotten used to it. And it's the same thing. So we're excited to be able to show those sorts of colors. We work very hard in coloring galleries to make sure that the adjacencies are really good. That means that we don't want each gallery to have a different color and for the galleries to suddenly look like fruit salad. We want them to have, to be colors that sort of move with one another. Now, the biggest kind of jarring, I guess, would be from when you walk into the Art and Ambition, and it's kind of that deep red of the 19th century. But those colors are, we're very happy with them, and the visitors seem to be liking them as well. So I hope that you like them as well.
Terrific. Well, Alexandra, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. It's such a pleasure to have you, and thank you for all your great work with Andalusia over the years. So we thank you all, and thanks everybody for joining us.